For our last section here, we're going to talk a little bit about cross sections and how we find them when we're dealing with a 3D solid. So we should all be on this page here in our notes. This should be the last page you probably have in your note packet. And maybe you've talked about cross sections before. Maybe you've heard that and it rings something from the past that you remember doing, or maybe you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say cross section. Cross sections show up in different ways in math. In fact, in my Algebra 3 class recently, we've been talking about a lot of different cross sections when we're looking at like a double cone. So when a cone is like the pointed end is attached to another pointed end, so it's like blowing out into a cone on both ends. We've been talking a lot about the different types of cross sections that can show up in that double cone picture, depending on how I decide to slice the shape. And so that's a lot more algebra-based type conic sections or cross sections. But today we're going to talk more about how do we get cross sections. If I look at a 2D shape, how do I get a 3D shape using it? Or if I have a 3D shape, how do I cut it? Like if I were to cut it, what does it look like? Okay, so what we're talking about here with cross sections, so if you just want to maybe write this at the top, is that this is a surface or shape that would be exposed by making a straight cut through the 3D shape. So I want you to imagine if you had a three-dimensional shape in front of you, like a pyramid, a cone, a cylinder even, or even maybe just like a sphere. If you were to take the shape that you have pictured, something that you feel really familiar with or you feel like would be easy for you to kind of wrap your mind around, and I want you to imagine if you were to slice that shape in half. So if you were to basically have like a cone in front of you, okay, laying in front of you, it's flat on the ground or on your desk, and if you were to just kind of slice it down the middle, and you pull those two halves apart, the interior shape that you see when you pull those two halves apart would be called the cross section. So for example, if I'm dealing with like a standard cone, okay, we all know what a cone looks like. It's got like that triangle face, and it's got like the rounded bottom, right? So I'm talking if I took this and I cut it right down the middle. If I just kind of imagine like a plane, or if I had like a caked or a cone-shaped thing and I just kind of slice it down the middle. If I were to pull those two halves apart, there would be triangular shapes that are appearing in front of me. Okay, so that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about cross sections, is we're cutting that shape in half. Now you could do that with a sphere, you could do that with any shape really, you could do this. And so you're just kind of thinking about what happens when we cut that shape in half. If I were to cut a sphere in half, it would be a circle. You know, if any of you have ever like had a golf ball or something like that, and you've seen it be split open, like you've seen it be split in half, then that's kind of what we're talking about, is that shape that's created by that shape, that when it's cut in half here. So if you've seen things like that before, that's kind of the idea that we're talking about here, are these shapes that are created when we do kind of this cross section piece here. But we're going to also kind of talk about today, how do we get to these shapes? Like, where do they come from? How do we create these types of 3D shapes if we know what the 2D shape is? So when you do a cross section and you cut a three-dimensional shape apart, like you slice it down the middle, it's going to create a 2D shape. And so what I want to go over today is, how do we take a two-dimensional shape and how do we make that become a three-dimensional shape? Okay, so I want you to look down at this first picture that I have here in your notes. If you've ever gone somewhere, like usually big cities or like a hotels, like big fancy hotels or something, sometimes they'll have those revolving doors. Have you guys ever seen those where it's like they're continually going around in a circular motion. You kind of have to time it just right. Like you get into the pocket of the door, you kind of have to walk with it as it's rotating, and then you kind of jump out, or you step out into the lobby area of the hotel, let's just say. Okay. So when I'm thinking about those doors, the panels of the doors that kind of separate it into compartments, right? Because there's usually like 4 or 3 compartments that you would like step into for the door. Those panels that are kind of going around in the circular like motion, what shape are those? The door itself is like a rectangle, right? Like even if you just think about my doorway is a rectangle. And so if I take this rectangle door and I start to make it move around a pivotal point, so all these doors here are positioned so that they're all positioned around this center line here. That's like the center of the 3D shape. And then that door is going around. And if I have lots of panels doing that, and I, think about that door going around and around and around, if I start to speed up the process, like start to speed up how fast those doors are traveling in a circle, eventually, if you're just looking at this thing that's rapidly spinning around, it's going to start to just look like a 3-dimensional shape. And it's going to start to take the shape, in this case, of a cylinder. So this revolving door is an example of when I have this 2-dimensional shape, this rectangle door here, and I start to spin it around this center, that it starts to look like a cylinder. So that's kind of what we're thinking of here, is when I start to take this 2D shape, whether it's a rectangle like this one, or I'm dealing with a triangle, or even something more obscure. We're going to start to see some like really weird examples here. If I were to start spinning it around a center point or a center line, okay, that's going to start to create your 3D shape. So you can even see down here, these next couple of examples are kind of showing you some other ways that you might think of these cross sections. And these shapes start to get a little bit more weird, right? They're not just like a traditional rectangle or a triangle. But if you were to cut it in half, sometimes those cross sections might be a little more bumpy, okay? Or they might have more lumps in them. They're not just going to be straight edges like we saw with the door. So on like the last 2 here, this shape that's shown here, it's kind of a little bit weird. Like these edges are straight and it's attaching to this axis here. But this top portion, it kind of goes down and then it goes up and then it starts to gradually go down again. It's a little bit more hilly, okay, if you will. If I start to take this shape and I start to rotate it like they're saying, they want me to take the shape and rotate it around this axis going this way. So I start spinning it around that pivotal point. It's going to create this shape here. All of those kind of that high point, we're talking about like this piece here is probably the highest point of that 2D shape. As that goes around, that's also going to be the widest point around the entire shape. That's going to stay consistent. Like it's always going to be that tall there. And as you rotate it around that center point, it's going to still stick out more than any other side of the shape will. Now, this is like the lowest part of the shape, right? And so that's right here. That's kind of like that opening at the end. As that kind of circles around on itself, it's going to be rounded again, but it's going to be smaller than what we saw up here at the top because that 2D shape kind of starts to angle downward there on the right. Okay, so as we're doing these today, we're going to be doing some sketching of the 3D solids that we think would be created when we start rotating a 2D shape. Now, sometimes it can be a little challenging to trace these, or it's a little bit hard for some of us to see all the time, like what shape is being created. Do your best when you come to tracing. I don't expect these to be, perfect pieces of 3-dimensional artwork here, okay? I want you to just kind of envision what's happening as I spin this shape around. So let's take a look at some examples down here. So I've got 3 examples here. We've kind of already talked about that first one, right? That was with the kind of like the door situation that we saw up here. So if I take that rectangle and I start to spin it around that line M, what's it going to create? It's going to create that cylinder, right? So I'm just going to sketch in the rest of it. Now, this is when I said just do your best. What I like to do is take this cross section and I like to just almost copy it down on the other side. So I'm just going to try to go out about how much I think it is. Okay, and just kind of create like another rectangle on the other half of that line. Almost like imagine you reflected it over the line. And then I know it's going to be curving, so I like to kind of connect it in a round shape. So, that wasn't very good, but like around the top, around the bottom. And then I like to do it on the other side too, but I like to do those in dashes usually when they go behind the shape because it's maybe not as visible to the eye. Okay, but kind of draw like a cylinder around that. So the outer, like top and bottom edges, they're not going to be straight rectangle sides anymore. They're going to be more curved, more fluid. So you're going to want to represent that. So a lot of these cross sections are going to have kind of a round shape to them. They're going to be something, not necessarily a true cylinder all the time or a true cone, but maybe something similar to that. Okay. I'm going to give you maybe a minute here or two, and I want you to just see what you can do with 2 and 3. If you're not 100% confident, that's okay. Just see what you can do for tracing those shapes and trying to make a 3D figure. Okay, so let's take a look at these. For number 2, that shape that you're rotating around is kind of this L-like shape. Now notice that it's not sitting on the line. You can see how there's a little bit of a gap there. So when that happens, there's like a gap between the shape you're rotating and the line you're rotating around. That means that there's probably going to be like a hollowness to the center shape. So when I take this, I'm going to trace it over here. Like I said, we're going to do the best we can to like space it out apart the same distance. Okay, and then I'm going to connect this, but I'm going to think about it being rounded. So the bottom shape here is going to connect the bottom of like those corners of my L. I'll try to do the best I can here. And then in the middle too, like these are going to connect as well. And then behind it is going to connect. So I'm going to do this one as a dotted line. And then back here. And then we're going to have similar things happening here at the top. Like in the front, I'm going to connect this, and this is going to round. And then this is going to go backwards, like so. And then we've got one more kind of rounded space here, and it would come like up this way too. So sometimes it can get a little bit messy when you start to draw in all those things, but it's like this L shape. So the L is going to kind of go around, okay, and it's going to kind of make this 3-dimensional shape around it. There's going to be like a hollow center in the middle though. So like this space here, kind of all down that cylinder in the middle there is going to be hollow, okay, unless they were going to fill it with something. But because there's that space from the L and the line that we're reflecting over, it's going to be a little bit different. This last one here, number 3, I would start by drawing kind of about this triangle shape, like so. And then again, it's going to be curving. So I like to just think about connecting corners. So like this is going to connect, and then it's going to kind of come back there. So almost imagine like maybe when you were kids, if you ever played with one of those like spinny top toys, where you just like spin it on your desk or on a table or something, it's kind of resembling that figure, okay? Now, when you guys get your homework today, you're going to actually get 2 worksheets from me. The first one is going to be going over like this stuff. Like you're going to have a worksheet that is just pretty much dedicated to practicing drawing these 3D shapes and maybe even like trying to describe what you think it looks like. Okay, so for example, like that last one I said, it kind of reminds me of like those spin top toys that you would have when you were younger. So they're going to maybe ask you like, what does this look like to you? And you can kind of describe in your own words what you think it is. But you're also going to get a second worksheet from me. And I'm going to show you how you're going to handle this worksheet. And I would say too, if you're struggling with the 3D solid that you're supposed to be creating and you're not sure, if you're doing it right, this website might actually be a little bit helpful for you too. If you're really struggling to kind of envision the 3D shape that's happening, you can plot these same pictures that you see on your homework from the first assignment onto this website. So I have a link to this website provided for you on your Schoology page. So when you guys have work time, you don't need to be doing it right now. You're going to go to Schoology and you're going to go to this website that I have linked. It should just be right at the top of your Schoology page. Now, I will warn you, this website is not in English, okay? It's in a different language. So you're going to end up going to a website that looks like this, okay? I'm not entirely sure what language this is in, but I promise you it is a safe website, okay? We've used this for many years, so it's not some weird, scammy website. When you get here, you're going to need to go right here where it says applets. You're going to click on these red letters that say applets, okay? When you click on this, it's going to give you a whole bunch of options. The one that you want is right here. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce this, but I think it's like Drawbank or Draybank or something. It's got like this circle with the arrows on it. Okay, you're going to click on that and you're going to get to this screen. Now, again, it's not in English, so I'm not entirely sure what those words are telling me to do. But basically how this works is you can plot points. Let me see if I can just zoom in on this. You can plot the points that you have on your worksheet here. So I'm going to show you the worksheet that you're going to get. I'm just going to pull it up here on the screen. So this is from yesterday, our candy activity. So this is the first worksheet you're going to get, but then you're going to get one like this. Okay, and you can kind of see these grids look like what we see on this website. So they're going to give you on here, they're going to give you a shape that they want you to graph. So like we're going to graph this one so you can kind of see. When I graph this, what it's going to do on this website is actually generate the 3D solid that would be created if I did this. We already know that when we rotate a rectangle around that it's going to make a cylinder. Okay, so when I do this, my shape that I'm looking for should look like this. Okay, now you're going to do that for all of these on this worksheet. How this worksheet works is the front side here gives you the 2D shape, and on the back, it gives you the 3D solid. You're just going to be doing some matching. And you may even get to the point where you get so familiar with how this works that you don't even need to use the website anymore. Okay, but you can use the website. And then on the second page, they want you to draw the 2D shape that created this solid. So that might be a little bit more of like testing on that website what's going to work for you to kind of draw in the 2D shape. Okay, so you'll get all of that here in just a second. But back to this, I just want to show you how you would do this. Now, this rectangle, it's like attached to that x-axis. It's about starting 2 over from the edge. So I'm going to go to my website here. So I'm going 1, 2 over. Let me see, I need to get my pointer. So I'm going to start a dot there, and then I'm going to trace my rectangle. So it went up 1 square. You can see how it's starting to create that for me. And then counting on here, it goes over 3 full squares. So here's 1, 2, 3. And then you can just finish it by going back down to that x-axis. And I think if you click it back, it creates it. And then what you can actually do over here is you can move this cylinder around. So you can really see all sides of that 3D shape. It's kind of cool how it does that, how it allows you to generate these images. Okay, and if you need to start over, so like after you did this one, you can see how it matches that shape that we saw on our homework page here. You can see how these look the same. To start for the next one, so like when you start to get to number 2, you can then just click on this WIS button and it'll clear it all for you and you can start over. So even if we go back to the one that we did in our notes today, so like this one here, it was like that L shape. If I go to this website, it does not land on the x-axis. So if I just kind of sketch what I think this looks like, if I make like an L, and I'm not being super accurate with mine, but there's that shape that we drew kind of in class today in our notes. So you can see the center is hollow, like I said, okay? And this is kind of more of that angle that we were drawing it at when it was faced like this. So we kind of had like that smaller circle on the top, the bigger rounded end on the bottom. That's kind of what I was trying to illustrate here. Now the website makes it look way nicer, right? But you kind of get an idea of how that's going to work. All right, so when you get your worksheets today, you can use this website to help you if you're struggling with how to draw the 3D shape. Put the shape that you're working with, place it on here. Now it's going to be in a possibly a different vantage point. Like ours on our notes were dealing with like on a vertical axis. This one's a horizontal axis, okay? But you could still like look at your screen sideways, draw it on there, and then look at your 3D shape. Okay, but so feel free to use that website, but you will need to use this one for that second assignment. So you're going to get 2 assignments today. Like I said, the first one looks like this, where you're just kind of drawing 3D shapes and you're kind of exploring those cross sections a little bit more. You can use the website for this if you would like to. And then this one, you will have to use that website. Okay, and I'm just going to walk through again one last time. When you get to this link, you're going to click on Applets here right at the top. You're going to click on this circle with the black arrows, this draw bank, and then in here is where you can graph it. Okay, hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you kind of understand what you're supposed to do here on your worksheets. You've got the rest of your class period to be working on these 2 assignments.